more on this intersection between politics and economics, let's bring in Gary Burtless. He is a labor expert and senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. We also have Bill Beach. He runs the Center for Data Analysis at the Heritage Foundation. Gentlemen, good to have you with us. Bill, let me start with you and pose the question. Is there anything that the president can say that you think can build bipartisan support for a change in the way that the government tries to revive the job market?
Well, I think there's plenty that he can say. I think he's got great opportunities here. He must, stay away from a record that hasn't worked. He needs to talk about regulatory burden. He needs to talk about ways of stimulating small business through targeted tax cuts. He needs a way of lifting as much government off of the productive sector of the economy as possible. I'm an advocate for trying things that have worked, and what has worked in the past has been lighten regulatory burden and cut taxes. Now, we can go any number of directions here to stimulate the economy. The problem is we have an immense problem. We have immense difficulty with all these millions of people who are facing very few prospects of being employed. Those numbers today were just astounding.
Gary Burtless, come in on this topic. What do you think the president's going to say, and will it be dramatic?
I don't have any inside information. You talked to Gene Sperling today. He would know a lot more than I would about what the president's going to say. I think I know what he ought to say. He ought to say we're going to have a much bigger stimulus plan if the Congress will go along with me. It's very clear that private business does not see prospects for improved sales, and so they're not adding to their payrolls. Without somebody standing as a source of increased demand in this economy, I think the job market is dead in the water.
Gary, does private industry, based on your take on the economy right now, does private industry see President Obama as an ally?
Well, they ought to. Profits in the corporate sector are as high as they've been as a share of income since the first year in the Korean War. So businesses are making huge amounts of profits. They're just not very optimistic about whether expansion will have a positive payoff, and so they're standing pat. They're not investing. They're not expanding their payrolls. They think they can meet all the demand that they see with the payrolls that they already have.
Bill, as Gary describes, corporate profits at record highs. Why don't they like the president, it seems?
Well, it's very interesting. We don't know what's going on inside the private economy as well as we will maybe in 5-10 years, but we were making a very nice recovery in the job market prior to the passage of the president's health care bill. Now, I don't know whether that was connected to the fact that every month thereafter we've had flat to very, very slow growth in the employment sector. It's almost like it was going up and the line was going up and then it flattened out. Something happened there. Now, when you add the uncertainty that's associated in the minds of small business people with the introduction of the health care bill into their businesses, along with the tremendous borrowing which is going on that apparently Gary wants a little bit more of, which is fine for that viewpoint, I think that reinforced this sense that the fiscal side, the public policy side, is a huge risk overhang on the economy. The risk premiums on investment capital must have just skyrocketed. Credit markets must have felt the further touch of more government borrowing. I think that will continue until the president signals a clear reversal in course. So I go back to my original point. He needs to reduce risk by reducing regulatory burden. He can do that by forgoing or maybe just delaying some of the implementation of the health care bill and doing other things like that to signal, yes, there is a future here to the American economy and it won't cost you so much to invest in this enterprise.
All right. Gary Burtless, can you respond to what Bill was describing and the idea that borrowing, you're going to have to get the money from somewhere if indeed you're going to vamp up a big government jobs program? Where's the money going to come from?
Did I mention that corporate profits are near a 60-year high?
I remember that part. Yes, indeed.
I should also add that the taxes on corporate income are near a 60-year low. So if low taxes are the trick to get the economy going, we should be going full speed right now. The notion that low taxes by themselves are the magic that makes business think there are willing customers to buy the goods and services they can produce is a delusion. They need to see the consumer. They need to see the people that are going to buy the goods and services they produce. I think that the government, with record low levels of interest on its borrowing, is in the best position to increase the demand for the businesses that can add to output right now, that can add to their payrolls. There's no one in the private sector that seems willing to step up and spend a lot of money to invest or to add to their payrolls. And so where will that customer come from? The best positioned customer is the federal government itself.
Bill Beach, how did you and Gary get to be so far apart?
I don't think we actually are. I mean, I don't disagree with anything he said. The corporate taxes are on the effective tax rate on corporate income is pretty low right now. Corporations, like households, have got a lot of cash. That's all true, and yet there isn't this demand for goods and services that Gary points out. It should be there. At this point in the recovery, the economy should be growing at 5, 6, even perhaps 7% after inflation. It's not. It's growing at 1, 2, and 3%. So again, we have to go to something that is right in front of us. We have borrowed a lot of money. Nothing wrong with borrowing money in times of economic trouble, but it's so much that it's created a risk. We have passed regulations, no problem with that. In times you need to regulate things, but we've passed so many and on such critical parts of the economy that it's created a risk. The conjuncture of all of those, plus what's happening in Europe, plus what's happening in Asia and China with the inflation and then the higher interest rates there, all of that is combining to give both businesses and consumers, and I'll tell you a couple of politicians here in this town, a lot of uncertainty about the future. Now, I know uncertainty is not a popular thing to point to by economists. It doesn't go into the Keynesian or the supply side part. But I think it's real in this instance, and it is holding back both the demand and the supply side of the economy. That is where presidential rhetoric is crucial. And so the president next week has got this moment in the sun. This is his time. I mean, there's no other point in time in his presidency as important as now. And if he gives a good speech, but more importantly says the right things from a policy standpoint, we could turn the corner. If he doesn't, just proposes more of the same, problem.
Bill Beach, what about a big infrastructure bank, one that is backed by federal guarantees, perhaps using money if you were to raise the corporate income tax, an infrastructure bank?
All right. Now, I think what we need to do now is create value in the private sector, and the public sector needs to get its house in order in some fashion. We need to balance that. There's no question that we have to reduce federal spending. We have to reduce the deficit. We have to bring our debt into line so that Moody's and Fitch doesn't follow S&P and further downgrade us. You know, there are some cases to be made for the public sector leading the way, but at this point, what's been tried has produced such a deep hold that we need to go in a more creative direction. And I think they're a combination of things. Yes, taxes are low, but they could be lower. I think, yes, regulations are high and they could be lower. And maybe there's a role for the public sector in some of these key areas. But we need a comprehensive plan, and it needs to look and feel different than the past 2 years.
Gary Burtless, your thoughts. An infrastructure bank, would that work?
Wait a minute, though. Look, there's a problem with this uncertainty, future tax increase fear. If all of this is true, this is the moment for businesses to put people on their payrolls. Now taxes are low. The tax on their investment is very low because there are concessionary tax rates for new investment right now. If you're going to do it any time in the next 20 years, this is the time to do it if you see customers willing to buy from you. But I'm afraid that businesses don't see that. And so the question is, how do we create the demand, the willing customers that will do this? I'm completely in favor of a big infrastructure program to get this economy going and get private businesses willing to hire again.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to leave it there. Maybe a little bit of an agreement. We're going to leave it there. I want to thank you very much. Gary Burtless joining us from the Brookings Institution. And yes, we've got Bill Beach from the Heritage Foundation.